Hi, everybody. How are you doing? This is Michelle Thorne from D.A.M.E.S, and this is our July webinar. As you know, D.A.M.E.S, Differently Abled Mothers Empowerment Society, is built on self-care and education for mothers who are raising special needs children. So on D.A.M.E.S, we offer guided meditations, yoga, Pilates, and fitness classes. But another part of what we offer are these monthly webinar series. And today I'm very, very happy to be hosting Gayle Nobel. She is a life coach and she is an author of 3 different books that speak to her experience raising a child with autism. So Gayle, thank you so much for being here today, and just really look forward to your presentation and all of the wisdom you're going to impart to us today.
Well, thanks for having me here. So I'm really, really excited to be here because this is a topic that is just really close to my heart and to my soul. Just a little tiny bit more about me. So I have a son with autism. His name is Kyle, and he is 35 years old. And he would probably be considered, I dislike these labels, but I'll just say he would probably be considered on the more severe lower end of the autism spectrum. He has a lot of lots of add-ons, lots of other things that kind of go with his autism. I also have a brother who just turned 59, and he is very similar to my son Kyle. So self-care, there's so much that can be said about self-care. And when I was thinking about it, I was talking to Michelle this morning. What I would like to do here on this webinar today is go a level deeper. So a lot of times when we think about self-care, we think about be sure you get enough exercise, be sure you drink enough water, yoga, Pilates, go have a spa day, go get a pedicure, and all those things are wonderful. So don't misunderstand. I'm not saying those things aren't important, and don't do whatever of those things speak to you. But what I would like to do, and I think I'm kind of guessing that most of you listening to this webinar kind of know about those things. Maybe you don't always do them, but I'm guessing that, they're on your radar, especially being part of D.A.M.E.S, who this group offers really wonderful resources for meditation and exercise. I haven't done any of the videos, but I've kind of looked in on them. So there's all kinds of things here for you guys to do in that realm. But what I would like to do is actually go a level deeper, and Michelle called it deep self-care, and I love that. I actually want to go 2 levels deeper. So I'm going to start on maybe what I would call level 2. And level 2 is things like, so I consider self-care to be, number 1, asking for help. And a lot of times as parents and as moms, we kind of like to be super mom for some reason. We don't always ask for help. And there could be a million reasons why we don't, but the fact is we don't always ask for help when we need it. And I have found over the years of walking this walk, just how important it is to do that, and even to ask for help from your spouse. And if you have a spouse, I know not everybody does. Some people are walking this walk alone. Maybe you have parents and other support people around you. But sometimes we assume that people should kind of like step in and know what we need in some way. I know I make this assumption with my husband at times. He happens to be very, very helpful on his own. But sometimes there's other things that I'm really needing from him that I'm almost expecting him to intuit that I need or that I want. So I think one part of self-care is recognizing that you need help and support, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean anything about you, and asking for it, because you can't necessarily assume that people are just going to volunteer, and maybe there are people that are even dying to help you but don't even know how. So I could go on and on about that, but I'll just leave that there. So asking for help, and big and small things, sometimes just a little thing can make a difference. Um, the other thing that I consider in the self-care realm is saying no. So some of us like to say yes to a whole lot of things, and we end up being overcommitted. And whether it be in your personal life, whether it be taking too many exercise classes, yeah, that is possible. Whether it be taking on something for your child because everybody else is doing that thing, or you're reading online that that's a good idea, but you've just added another thing to your load. There's so many areas where we go along or we say yes when sometimes we really just need to say no, and that's enough, and know that we don't have to do every single thing. um, the other really important part of self-care is connecting with other people, and it's especially really nice, and this group is amazing for this, to be able to connect with other parents of kids on the autism spectrum, or with any kind, whatever your special need of the day is. And I will share, and Michelle and I were talking a little before the class started. So my son was born at the end of 1983. So we didn't even own a computer back then, let alone have the internet. So there weren't all these wonderful ways to connect with other people and to get information. And I was doing a certain kind of program with my son where I had to go back east, and I ended up meeting another mom, and we became really, really close phone pals. And so my first book, It's All About Attitude, was actually written with her. And we write a lot about our relationship in the book because it was such an important part of our journey. And looking back, it's hard to imagine not having that as part of the journey. So I just would encourage you, because sometimes we isolate ourselves, and sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to just get quiet and be to ourselves. But I also think it's important for us to have at least one connection to somebody that we can talk to, who really gets it, who really gets this journey we're walking on, because it's different. It's different than raising kids that don't have special needs. And you might have some friends without kids with special needs, and they can be compassionate, but there's nothing quite like that friend who has a child maybe similar to yours or with the same diagnosis, where you could just share. And for me, whenever I would talk with my friend, it wasn't like we solved problems, although sometimes we did solve some things talking or get ideas from each other, but it was just the idea of being able to be heard and understood. So it seems obvious, but a lot of people don't realize, I think, the impact of connecting with others. And you guys in this generation are so lucky, because you can meet people online, you can meet people in groups, but talking on the phone or talking by Skype or whatever, there's nothing quite like making that connection. Okay. The other thing that I think is a really important part of self-care is in some way being able to tap into and nurture your creativity, even if it's something really small. And it comes in different packages. Like, I think about this group, and I think that D.A.M.E.S is sort of an offshoot of Michelle's creativity. So creativity doesn't necessarily mean you're a writer, or you're a painter or an artist, or anything like that. Creativity is just creating. It's just creating something that wasn't there before. So maybe it's making a cup of coffee, or a cup of tea, but being aware of into your creativity and nurturing it in whatever way that you can is also part of self-care. I made this big list and I'm not going to have a chance to talk about every single thing, but another part of self-care is thinking about spend or kind of like shining your light on spending less time trying to fix things, or thinking you need to fix things, or thinking you need to fix your child, or thinking you need to fix yourself or your spouse or something. And I think that there's a difference between helping. Of course, we're always going to help our child be the best they can be. And I'm certainly a great example of that. So my son is 35 years old and I'm still working with his caregiver and support team, and we're still trying to help him move forward. But I know, at least for me personally, there was a pretty good chunk of time period when he was pretty little that there was this drive, this obsessive drive to kind of fix him, to bring him out of this autism. And if I just worked hard enough and worked myself to the bone enough and did enough of these things that I thought I was supposed to do, then maybe I would be successful. And I don't look back on that in criticism of myself. That's just kind of how it was and where I was at. But just to be aware and to notice, what kind of mode are you in? And are you spending a whole lot of your sort of mental bandwidth in fix it mode? And there's a little bit of a fine line there too of, yeah, you want to help everybody be the best they can be, and you also want to enjoy them where they're at. So I could say a whole lot more about that, but I want to be sure I cover some other things too. Um, so I think what I want to do now actually is kind of move one level down, one level a little bit deeper to some things that I think are really important to understand. And so I'm not giving the listeners here or the attendees something else to do or to add to their list or to anything to put pressure on themselves. So this is more things to understand. And I think when we understand how we as human beings work, we just are able to live a little bit more gracefully and a little bit smoother in some of these rocky waters that we're presented with when we have kids with special needs, because it gets pretty rocky sometimes, as you all know. So none of what I'm sharing today is to say that it's always smooth and it's always rosy. But I think the more we understand about anything, the better equipped we are to kind of roll with it. And I'm sure that you guys have found that true, that the more you understand about autism or whatever the diagnosis your child has, it makes it just that much a little bit easier for you. And even like I like to sometimes compare self-care to, charging your cell phone. So understanding that your cell phone needs charged to run optimally is a good thing. So then you'll to take care of that. So that might not be the best metaphor, but okay. So we're going to go down one level deeper. And one of the things that I have just learned from some kind of spiritual studies in the last few years is understanding the true nature of human beings. And So it could get a little woo-woo, but I promise it won't get too woo-woo. But the way that I like to think of it is that we all kind of have this jewel or diamond inside of us. And it's the same jewel that we're in love with when we first see our child, when our child is born. Um, it's this place of what I'll call health and well-being and peace that kind of lives inside of us all the time. But what happens is it kind of gets covered over. So life comes in and we have difficult, challenging circumstances, and we have a lot of thinking about those circumstances. And all of a sudden that diamond that's inside of us gets a little, I want to say, like caked over with gunk or whatever. But the thing is that the diamond is always there. And so the reason I share this is because we talk a lot about self-care and how important it is, and it absolutely is. And at the same time, we always have access to that diamond that's inside of us because it's really only one thought away. And when our minds clear, which might be taking a walk, it might be meditating, it might be taking a shower, but it also might be none of those things, because throughout the day our minds kind of go up and down with how busy they are, so that when our minds clear and our minds settle down, we do have access to that diamond inside. We have access to that peaceful state that we are at our core. So it's hard because I'm not interacting with anyone, so I don't know if this is making sense to you guys or anything. But the reason that I think knowing about this, and even if you're going, what the heck is she talking about? But even getting a glimmer of understanding that that's there and available, it's just really, really useful. So that you know that even on a day when you didn't have time to exercise and it feels like maybe you didn't have time to take a deep breath, which I'm all about breathing. I wrote, my second book was called Breathe, but to know that that place inside of you is always there, and you have access to it. And at the end, if anyone has questions about this or wants to talk more about it, it's a little bit hard to sort of explain. It's kind of like your soul or your spirit, or yeah. So with that in mind, the other layer down that I wanted to talk about, and I talk a lot about this in my third book, Space of Love, is inner wisdom. And inner wisdom, understanding that we all have a connection to this wisdom that almost feels like it comes from inside of us, but it also comes from outside of us in a way. We're connected to something, whatever that energy is that makes the tree outside your window, or that energy that allows a baby to develop in a woman and come out as a human. So we're always connected to that same energy. And we have access to that, but we sometimes just don't realize we have access to that because we just get so caught up in life, and life is happening really fast, and we have our minds are going 100 miles an hour, thinking that we have to figure everything out. And the reason I like to put this under self-care is because I think it's almost like remembering we kind of have this superpower. And the superpower allows us to not have to strain and work as hard to figure things out. I hope this is making sense, because there's a whole lot of things that pop up in life with a kiddo with special needs that feel like they have to be figured out. And I'm sure that you guys are agreeing with that. Um, and the thing is, you're going to get a lot of input as well. So one of the blessings and also the curse of the internet is that there's so much out there. So there feels like, I'm imagining, because I didn't have the internet when Kyle was little, that it feels like there's so much out there to sort out and to figure out, and what should I do, and this person's doing this, and this website is saying this, and I should be doing that. There's a lot of figuring out things to go. But I just think it's really important to uh-oh, feel like maybe I've lost somebody. Okay, we're back. I think it's really important to understand that we have this source of wisdom within us that's always there to guide us, and we don't have to work as hard as we may think we have to work. And talk about self-care, like knowing that is pretty amazing. So I want to share actually a couple of just personal stories with that regard, to help make this a little bit more real. And one of them actually goes back a really long time. I was thinking about it earlier. So when Kyle was maybe about 9 or 10 years old, we were looking into a therapy called patterning, and you guys probably haven't even heard of it, because it actually was, so this was the 80s, but this therapy was from maybe the 70s or maybe even older than that. And we found this man who was coming, this older man who was coming to our house to kind of guide us through doing this therapy. And a lot of it was physical exercises that were supposed to help take his body through some developmental stages he missed, or whatever the thought was behind it. And it required a lot of time, and it required a lot of help. Like, I never really could do the exercises by myself. It required a lot of moving him around, and he wasn't full grown yet, but he was bigger than being a little one. And I remember doing this for a few months, and at some point, like a little bell went off. And that was my wisdom speaking, that said, you, no matter how maybe effective this could be, and we didn't see it to be effective, but I was still banking that maybe there was something to it. um, you can't keep doing this. Like, I just, it just became to where I knew that this wasn't the right thing to do. Unfortunately, I dropped it. um, And so another little story about wisdom, um, is more recent for me. And that is, so my son was in a serious auto accident a couple of years ago. He was in a car with a caregiver. And he, I won't go into the whole, there's kind of a long story to it, but basically he had some injuries and some surgeries and some hardware put in his leg and his pelvis. And he came home from the hospital after 10 days, and he was in a wheelchair. And before the accident, he was very physically active young man, and he is now. He recovered, made a full recovery. But when he came home, he was in a wheelchair, and he had this big boot on. And I remember wheeling him into his bedroom, and a wheelchair was new for me. That's never been a part of what we had to kind of deal with. And I remember wheeling him into his bedroom and just sitting there and going, okay, so I have no idea what we're going to do now, because I don't really even know how to transfer him to his chair, to get out of the wheelchair. And there were so many steps ahead of us. And one of them was the fact that he couldn't be left alone, like for a second, because I didn't know if he would try to get up and walk. As it turns out, he didn't really try to do that for a long time, but he couldn't walk by himself. He really needed support if he was going to walk. So I realized, oh my God, so somebody has to be in the house with me, or two caregivers together all the time. And I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. And I could give you a really long list of all the things that I was like, oh crap, I don't know how to do this. But somehow wisdom from me took me one step at a time through everything I needed to get through. And I'm not saying it was all easy, and I'm not saying it was all a perfect flow and I wasn't struggling against it some of the time, but that's the only thing that got us through that I can see, was that for each step, I took another step and I knew what to do for the next step. I didn't know what 10 steps were down the road. And it's the same with your child. You don't know 10 steps down the road. You don't know next year, but you can figure out the next step. You'll always be able to figure out the next step, because you have access to that wisdom. And sometimes the next step is to wait for you to hear what the next good idea is. Um, but I think that understanding, just like having like this little glimmer of it, even if it sometimes feels like, I don't know, um, is so important. Like, it's such an important part of self-care, because it means that you don't really have to work so hard to figure everything out in advance, that you can go step by step and you are connected to this wisdom or intuition, or if you want to call it like your GPS, inner GPS system, um, your hunches, whatever speaks to you. You always have that in you. And what an amazing superpower that we have. Um, so that's about wisdom. And then there's one more thing. There's actually two more things, and then I'll stop for questions. Um, the third thing is another thing to understand, and it's a really cool thing. So a lot of times most of us think that having a child with special needs or autism is our source of stress and struggle. And so what I want to actually give you guys to consider, and I write about this in my book, and I've seen it firsthand, is that that actually is not the case. What is our source of stress and struggle is resistance. So it's our resistance to what's happening in the moment. It's our resistance to the fact that this is the child we got and not the one we were expecting, certainly. But this is what we have. It's our resistance to just, you name it, anything. And, resistance is a normal part of being a human being. So I don't want anyone to hear this and say, okay, I just never need to be resistant again, and then I won't have stress and struggle. So I'm going to say right now that you're going to be resistant, because you're human and we're all human. And even when you see that it's your resistance that is your stress and is your struggle, you're still going to be resistant from time to time. And maybe sometimes more often than not often. But the cool thing about knowing about resistance is that you don't have to change anything in the outside world for you to settle down and for you to move out of that stress and out of that resistance. And then a new idea comes to you on something to do about whatever it is you're dealing with. It's kind of like that thing that you kind of carry in your back pocket. Uh-oh, we lost some people. Um, Well, okay, Michelle is still there.
Yeah, just keep going.
Okay, so so it's really something to understand and know about being a human being, and it's okay that you're resistant sometimes. Um, I liken it to, if you think about, if you were like on a river and you were paddling in your boat or your canoe or whatever, and the river was taking you in one direction, but you were determined to go off in the other direction, and you're really straining and really stressing to paddle really hard and get yourself in that direction. But the river is taking you right or left or whatever. And once you let go of some of that paddling, and begin to flow a little bit more with where the river is taking you, um, it just, the boat ride just gets a whole lot easier. It doesn't mean that maybe you still wouldn't like to go the other direction, or you might like to do some different things on the road the river is taking you on. But once you kind of lift your oars out of the water a little bit and flow with what where life is taking you, then it's a form of self-care, because your journey just got a little bit lighter, a little bit more graceful. And the cool thing about knowing about resistance, again, isn't that you're never going to be resistant again, but it's going to be that you're going to notice it. And noticing is really powerful. Noticing is huge. And that's all you have to do. And that's all that I'm sort of proposing or suggesting. If you were going to do anything, it would just to sort of be to notice your wisdom. Notice when you're resisting reality. Because, the reality is that you have the child that you have, and that's what you have. And when you paddle against it, it hurts. It's more struggle. So one more thing, and this is also something to understand, is all the understanding that you are doing the best you can in each moment, given the thinking that's going through your head, or given your mindset, or given your perspective, or given how clear your clarity of mind, or whatever you want to call it. You're always doing the best you can. And that doesn't mean that in the next moment maybe you can make a shift and do something differently. But a lot of times as parents, and I myself, we're guilty of really doing a lot of shoulda, coulda, woulda on ourselves. And I don't know how useful that is. You still might do it, but knowing that it's not really useful. You are doing the best you can. Sometimes we're carrying a lot of loads at one time, and it can be pretty challenging to be your optimal best self with all those loads. So I guess the self-care would be cutting yourself some slack in that regard, and understanding that your child is doing the best they can too. And sometimes you're wondering, well, how that could be, because maybe they're on the floor having a tantrum, or maybe like my son, they're super resistant to something, or maybe like Michelle and I were talking about, our kids were up a lot during the night. But I think they're still doing the best they can. If they could do it differently, they would. A lot of our guys, my son very much included, struggles with basic communication. And so some of the things he does are a function of not having that basic communication. And that's the best he could do. And yeah, we wish he would do it differently. But I think understanding that, like carrying that understanding in your back pocket and coming back to it when it occurs to you, also is a way of kind of lightening our load, and a form of self-care. So I feel like I packed a lot into a short amount of time. We could go into a lot more detail about some of those things. But I'd love to open it to questions, and I'm open to any question. It doesn't have to be something that we talked about, that I talked about today. If you want to know something about any other experience I've had, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a lot of really, really good information. And I like how you can hear the same information, but it's put a little bit differently. Denise, just so you know, I unmuted you. So you could ask questions. I wasn't sure if you still are driving. But Gayle, I like how, I love this visual thing about the diamond and the mindfulness, and having that kind of inner strength, but how you phrase it as that visual image of the diamond. I've never heard of it in that context. And I think it really allows more people to kind of have an image of what that inner strength and that inner beauty, and that thing is, it's like inside of us, but maybe we just cover it, or it's covered and we need to like dust it off a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. And sometimes I think of it almost as a plant in a way too, that sometimes it needs some water and some care.
Yeah.
Um, but that it also has this amazing resilience. And that's one thing that I didn't talk about, but I do like talking about, is our resilience.
Yeah.
And that it has that resilient, the same, like, how when you see a plant that comes up in a sidewalk,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, how could that have gotten, like, there's a dry sidewalk here and a crack, and there's that plant.
Yeah.
So it didn't get a whole lot of water or nurturing, but somehow it found its way up. So I think about that too.
Yeah. And I really love like meditations that focus on that, like that, finding that inner strength. And like you were saying, knowing that you can tap back into it anytime that you need it, that it's something you carry with you all the time, and it's there. You just have to learn how to really find it and tap into it. And I'll just say, doing these kinds of things have been really helpful for me, because when my son has autism, he's 6.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of meltdowns, lots of tantrums, nonverbal, so lots of expressions through behavior. And it was really hard for me to stay calm when he did all of that, because that was 3 years ago. I was really struggling with everything, because you get so overwhelmed, and, there's just chaos. And now my daughter, who's 3, is going through that same episodes. But now I just kind of sit down and I breathe with her, and I'm just like, I'm right here, honey, and the energy is so different. And nothing externally, like you said, changed. The
Right.
situation did not change. She is still having a big meltdown, but because I have somehow figured out that inner strength and that resiliency, I can sit there and be calm with her and not get angry, escalate the situation, get just make things worse by my energy. And
Mm-hmm.
so that whole thing about self-care, it's like the light self-care. Yeah, you can go get a pedicure, you can go get a manicure. That's great. But then if you come back to that screaming child, and the inner strength and that inner part isn't fixed or healed, or you haven't found that, then all of that light self-care is for nothing, because you come home and you're right back into the chaos. And I just had, 30 minutes, like, great, somebody rubbed my foot, but now I'm home and I'm stressed again,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not fixing that deep problem. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that you gave a lot of really great tools and knowledge. And, it's so lovely to hear from somebody who has really walked the walk and been there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just so thankful for your books, and I'm so thankful for the knowledge that you can give to us who are still raising younger children, who, it's like you said, like, yeah, some days I can sit there with her and I'm like, oh, you're fine. And then some days I'm still like, like it's a roller coaster. I mean, you're not ever just, I'm happy with the world. Everything is always fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay. Like, if we put pressure on ourselves that we always have to have some sort of perfect attitude or perfect thinking about a situation, that just adds another layer. Like, we don't need that. So I think allowing ourselves to be human and noticing, and how cool of you to notice the difference between your 2 kids where you're at. But maybe some days you're not there, but you're seeing it. So yeah, I think the more we can allow ourselves to be human,
Yeah.
and not think that everything about us has to be fixed up, because it's never going to be. I can tell you that. I mean, I'm almost 35 and I'm still not really quite fixed up perfect. But what I've learned, and it's taken me a while because I was pretty obsessed with this, like, self-improvement path for a long time, what it's taken me a while to learn that it's okay. Like where I'm at is really okay. And I really, and I kind of wished I'd have gotten that a little sooner, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge because it's really that grounding is like something that we struggle with in the very beginning. And like you said, even you can it's an ever evolving process. So it's not like we're ever like 100%. And that's like you said, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
gonna go up and down and we're gonna come in and out of things and struggles and new things that happen. And it's just learning how to roll with the punches, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really liked what you had to say about listening to your inner wisdom. Because I agree with you that it's great that we have the internet and we have all these things, but then I feel like we are flooded with you need to do this protocol, you need to get on this medication, you have to try this therapy, and then you're just like, then you don't do anything.
Right.
You're
Right.
paralyzed.
Yeah. You don't do anything, or you feel bad because you're not doing what this person's doing over here, or
Yeah. So I like that idea of, maybe even just shutting it all down and just listening to yourself and, taking it a step at a time. One of my favorite phrases is, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time.
yeah.
You cannot tackle this problem in a day. You cannot tackle this situation in a month.
Yeah.
It's, you just go and you take one step at a time. And I
Yeah.
think that that's huge. And I love that you brought that up and that idea of, and again, I hadn't heard it phrased that way, that inner wisdom and that really kind of silencing and listening to yourself and not all of these other things going on around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and too, and trusting that in the most like critical times, like in an like with my son, from the time we arrived to the scene of the accident, like I knew what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like what was going on, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but I went with the flow, like I had to, and I knew what to do next. What hospital should we go? The paramedics go, what hospital? Just all the things throughout the whole time.
Yeah.
I figured it out, and I had never been in a situation like that before.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I thank you so much for being here today. And I think that that was a lot of really great
good.
information. And again, I just love hearing other people talk about it because you hear it in a different way and it means something else and it gives you enough, like I will always remember that diamond and that mindfulness visualization because it's such a good, powerful visualization to hold on to. And so I really just love that. Okay. So yeah, so I think that we are good. Thank you so much for your time today. And Gayle is a member of D.A.M.E.S. If you ever need to reach out to her, she is always available. You have always just been there anytime I needed to talk to
Oh
somebody.
yeah.
Really just appreciate that. And you're just such a great guide for those of us who are at the very beginnings of this journey.
So yeah, for anybody listening, definitely reach out. My book Space of Love is available everywhere. It's on audiobook and it's beautiful to listen to. I blog, gonna get back to it very soon, but I have a website with lots of blogs on there and I'm really accessible everywhere. So, and I'm happy, like if you ever have a question about anything, I'm really happy to be a support for anybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great. I appreciated it.
Thanks for being there. I hope you are driving safely and got to your destination.
Actually, I got home and I sat for a while and listened, and now we're off to the next journey with our kids. So,
Okay.
but I did get to sit and watch for 99% of it. So thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome. All right. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Gayle.